Hello and welcome to Free Speech Nation, the podcast, with me, Andrew Doyle. I'm delighted this week to be joined by Kate Hoey, who represented the constituency of Vauxhall for 30 years as a Labour MP, and then last year became Baroness Hoey of Lisle Hill and Rathlin in County Antrim, where she grew up in a unionist household. She was unusual for a Labour MP because she voted Brexit and has often voted against the party whip on numerous issues relating to the EU. Baroness Hoey, I've been thinking a lot about your career because you were a Brexit-supporting Labour MP, and that must have put you at odds with a lot of, well, we know it did, it put you at odds with a lot of people in your party. I mean, I come from a leftist background as well, and I was openly supportive of Brexit, and in the comedy community, let me tell you, that's not a good idea.
No.
It's a bit like shooting yourself in the foot. So I feel a certain affinity in that respect. So
that's very nice. No, I mean, actually, we became we Brexiteers, particularly those who were seen as on the left, became very close in many ways because we all suffered the same, not quite harassment, although we got harassment as well, walking around Westminster from the Remainers who stood there with their flags. But I think there was a feeling that we were actually fighting more than just a Remain group of MPs, or we were fighting a kind of the establishment, weren't we?
Yes.
Everybody thought that anyone who voted or wanted to leave was somehow a bit nutty.
And did you have any particularly bad reactions within your party? I mean, I know that Jeremy Corbyn has for 40 odd years been opposed to the EU and quite vocally, or the EEC as it then was. But he ultimately had to do a job of kind of masking that, or kind of treading a line, sort of supporting the idea of remaining in the EU, but reluctantly, which is a hard line to tread, isn't it?
I actually felt very sympathetic towards Jeremy because, well, first of all, I think after he was elected by that huge majority, I mean, there were some of our MPs who just were out to get him and proved very quickly that that's so. Whatever you thought of Jeremy, I don't think it was a very nice way to treat a new leader. And then on the EU issue, I mean, I'd been in the lobby with him over 30 years on anything that was vaguely able to vote to show our discontentment with the European Union. So it was difficult for him because he was clearly someone who, if had not been leader of the party, would have been joining us, supporting the EU on all the issues to do with low wages and all of the kind of left way of arguing for getting out. Yes,
well, I mean, he rebelled against the whip as well.
All the time on EU. I mean, he voted against Maastricht, like I did. Voted against the Lisbon Treaty, supported our calls for a referendum long before anyone else was pushing for it. We were, there was a referendum group who wanted to have a referendum. So he and then he became leader just at the time when it was the big issue. And I mean, that was the problem. I think if he had kept true to what he really felt, he probably still wouldn't be leader. But at least he would have felt, I think he would probably within himself have felt better.
I think also the perception of that caused problems insofar as people knew how he felt about the EU. He was so much on record. And so therefore to attempt to sell it became it was a difficult sell, and a lot of people started to mistrust it.
Yes, it's always difficult if you've been absolutely clear about something to suddenly say more or less that you've changed your mind, other than for what seems just quite blatantly political reasons in terms of the Labour Party. But I mean, the Labour Party behaviour on the EU from the beginning. I mean, I had no argument with people who wanted to support remaining, but it was the way they did it. And then once we had voted to leave, complete disregard for those Labour areas and those Labour people who had campaigned so hard to get out.
So I definitely want to get onto this because there is this sense that there was an attempt to thwart democracy from within Parliament itself. But if we can go back a bit further, because I think a lot of people are confused by how is it that the Labour Party, which in 1983 ran on a manifesto to get out of the common market, how did it shift? When did that happen? Was it Kinnock? Was it Blair? How did it become the party of Remain?
I think probably it started a little bit with Kinnock, but mainly Blair. I mean, Tony Blair came in as leader of going to get us elected as this, we were going to be a new kind of Britain, a new kind of country, and we were going to work with the European Union. And I remember I was a junior minister at the time, in the Home Office with Jack Straw as the Home Secretary, and we had to go to the EU in those days. It was before before majority voting in the Home Affairs Justice area, and the line we had to take always was that they're our good friends. We must work with them. We must make sure that we don't do anything that sort of sets us apart. So we had all these ridiculous machinations go on within the EU where Jack Straw would be against something very strongly that was being put up, and he would be arguing for that. We would sit there in Brussels and be arguing for something that was really, really important that we weren't going to agree with.
Yes.
And of course, you would get other ministers from other countries sort of coming up in the tea breaks and saying, well, we actually agree with you, but we're going to support this because we must all stick together. And then at the end, when it came to the crunch, a message would come through from via Downing Street, via the UKREC, saying, sorry, but you've got to give way on this because we want to get something else elsewhere, in another area of European. So, it was the wheeling and dealing.
Okay.
If I hadn't been sort of anti the whole EU anyway, because I was when I voted various times over the years, I would have, I hated the way what Brussels worked, and that whole, you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours, that sort of idea of what politics wasn't to me what.
Well, this is something I hear again and again from people who've had direct experience at Brussels, as you have, from your time in the Home Office, but that they don't like either the atmosphere there, the way things work, the bureaucracy, that kind of thing. So that exacerbated it, didn't it, being there?
Yes, it did for me. But then I think some people, in order to survive working in that kind of atmosphere, become almost zealots, So you either go and become a real signed up member of the EU is wonderful squad, or you decide that this is just not for us. And it just was so alien to the kind of way we did politics in our country.
Yes.
So I think Tony Blair was absolutely responsible. And then, unfortunately, of course, what happened earlier than that was the whole question of trade unions and the way that they shifted because of the social chapter and the feeling that the way they could get more rights and all of these things that they were campaigning for was through the EU giving it through the social chapter. And of course, that was a bit of a nonsense, really, because so many of the issues and so many of the things that we gained were gained by trade unions in this country fighting for them and getting them. And also we were much better off than some of the EU directives. We had already implemented things there that were much better. But once Tony Blair sort of set out on that, it became, I think then, it literally did become that it was, that was, anyone who spoke out within the Labour Party, even in those red wall seats where there were lots of natural EU who didn't like the EU, it was brushed aside, or it was, that's not the line. So
by the time the referendum was coming about, that transition from a Eurosceptical Labour Party to a Europhile Labour Party, it was complete. It was complete.
It was absolutely complete. And Jeremy took the leadership knowing that it was a Europhile party, really. Yes. But we did, those of us who were involved with Labour Leave, a small number of us, did feel that, Jeremy, and he had Seamus Milne working for him, who was also strongly anti-EU. And John McDonnell at one time had been strongly anti-EU as well. Yes. But I think he was more willing than Jeremy to shift quickly because of what, he was sort of kind of, I suppose, the Trotskyite approach of the long game.
Yes.
He saw it as being, better to get Labour into power, and I think he thought that, not going along with, I think he thought that there'd be no chance of the referendum.
I think most people thought that it was going to happen.
Well, I got it right. I appeared on the BBC Daily Politics on the Monday, and I was on with the New Statesman political correspondent and the Spectator political correspondent. And I'm very proud of this because we, at the end of this discussion, this was the Monday, we were asked, she asked, now, come on, I want you all to say what's going to happen on Thursday. And so, of course, the New Statesman guy said, oh, well, Remain is going to win, definitely. Yes. There's no doubt about it. The polls are all showing that, blah, blah, blah. The Spectator political editor said, well, I wish it wasn't so, but I think I think he's right. Remain is going to win.
Yeah.
And I just came in and said, actually, you're wrong. Leave is going to win, and the reason you two think Remain is going to win is because you don't get out of London enough.
You see,
and that was I just felt so great afterwards when we did win.
Because and it's not prophecy or anything.
No.
There was valid reason for thinking that, because you've gone out.
I was out all around those seats that have now gone.
But why weren't those people telling the pollsters?
Well, I think a lot of the pollsters probably didn't spend a lot of time up in those seats either, really. But also, I met so many people who literally would come and whisper to you. I don't mean
like
at the
a dirty
rallies,
secret, wasn't
but
it?
yeah, they did not want to admit openly, and it was very interesting in the House of Commons because you'd walk around and some of the attendants or the security guys or the people who worked in the kitchen, and I had quite a lot of constituents who sort of worked in the palace because it was so near, and they would whisper, literally whisper and say, "Thank you for what you're doing." That kind of attitude. It was actually quite sad, that people really felt almost afraid to speak out.
Do you think that's partly because during the campaign and during the debates, from my perception, there was a sense in the media that one side was being demonised already, was being smeared as, if you vote this way, you must be stupid, racist, etc. And as a result, people took that on board and just felt, well, if that's what people are going to think of me, I'll wait until the anonymity of the ballot box. I mean, is that...
Well, I think from the beginning we were either told we were stupid or we were racist or all of those things. And of course, people in public life, I mean, we could take that and you were used to be people. But I think if you're someone in working in somewhere where the vast majority of the people seem to be taking one view, and also where you saw, you turned on the media, BBC and the whole media establishment were in favour of remaining. And you have to be quite brave or quite savvy to really speak out about that.
Yeah.
And, I think that given the interest that we could have had from the referendum, because people did take an interest who didn't normally get involved in politics. And one thing I remember very much people saying was, we know this vote matters. I mean, normally in my constituency, they would say, or in another constituency, we know that, we could vote Conservative, but Labour will always get in, or we could vote Labour, but this time we know that our vote actually is going to make a difference. Because and we used to say that at rallies to people, your vote actually genuinely matters this time. So I think that's how also we did very well, because we got people to vote who had not voted before. And
I mean, that wasn't just coming from you. The government themselves issued those pamphlets. They spent £10 million on those pamphlets to every house saying the government will do what you decide. We will implement what you decide, which I think exacerbated the sense of betrayal when it looked like they weren't.
Yes, they had made it clear, and we spent ages in Parliament working on the referendum question, working on the fact that it was going to be not an advisory referendum, but it was going to actually mean something. And I think that's what David Cameron obviously thought he was going to win, which is why he wanted it to be a definite referendum, not one that was going to be able to be said, oh, well, this is only advisory, now we have to do it again.
The revisionism that was involved in this really struck me, is that afterwards, that phrase, this was an advisory referendum, was uttered by absolutely everyone, and yet it was never said beforehand. And are you saying that it was discussed whether this was advisory? Oh yes,
there was discussions about it, and there were probably some people who did want to push, there were, I mean, let's be honest, there were people in Parliament who didn't want a referendum, whether it was on that issue or anyone, who do not believe in referenda and feel that everything should be done in Parliament. And, there is a case to be made for that parliamentary democracy, you don't need referenda. So I think that was part of lots of the discussion was, why should we have this? Why is this different from other issues? And I think... The government then discovered, of course, that when they had lost, they were pretty well stuck with it. The opposition decided that they might have lost, but they were going to fight it, which they did.
I think a number of things struck me about this entire debacle, but I think one of them is the way in which there was this kind of attempt, yes, to revise history to an extent, but to actually do it in such a way that attacked the voters in particular, to suggest that they did not know what they were voting for. And yet, as you said yourself, people were energised. People were involved with politics who weren't normally. So there were debates. People were talking about it everywhere, in the pub, in the cafe, absolutely everywhere. To say that people didn't know what they were voting for after months and months of debate is, I mean, I just thought it was incredibly insulting, whichever way you voted.
Yes, and I think it, the people who did that have a lot to kind of, really, they are the people to blame now for the fact that there is so much cynicism about our politics and our politicians. And, when we saw what went on in Parliament and those long debates with, Speaker Bercow trying his best to do everything that was going to stop it.
Do you consider him an activist speaker?
Oh, he was shocking. I mean, I made my views very clear publicly. I mean, I thought he was the most appalling speaker. I was a great fan of Betty Boothroyd, even though she actually was a Remainer in the end, but Betty was a wonderful speaker, completely impartial. John Bercow made, right from the beginning, it was clear he wanted to stop Brexit, and he did what he could, and he was backed up by people like Hilary Benn and our Keir Starmer, our now future leader. Yes. Not my future leader, because I'm no longer in the Labour Party.
Yes. But, I mean, isn't that astonishing, though, someone like Hilary Benn, and you think about the difference with his father, and actually, I wanted to quote Tony Benn on his 5 questions, which he said that he would always put to anyone with economic, social or political power. And these are the questions. What power have you got? Where did you get it from? In whose interest do you use it? To whom are you accountable? And how do we get rid of you? Yeah. Now that, to me, sums up the problem that we have with the European Commission in particular, that we have no recourse to get rid of those people who have incredible power. Yes. Why are those questions from this venerated character within the history of Labour, why are these no longer considered important to so many members of the Parliamentary Labour Party? I wish I had an answer to that. I mean, I think a lot of our candidates now were brought in as candidates, fully signed up to New Labour's kind of attitude to the EU, and they would say that, well, if we stay in, we can change things, we can help to mould it. We're a great moderniser in terms of how it could work. But people like Tony Benn. I mean, even during the referendum, he was denigrated by Labour strong, shadow cabinet ministers, and that was, I think, quite amazing. And then you think back to people like Peter Shore, who made some brilliant speeches at the time when we were voting way back, even before your time, probably, in 1975, and he made some great speeches about just, fear. He said it in his wonderful speech in the I think it was at the Oxford Union. What is it that this government are trying to get people? Why, in terms of voting, it's fear. They will, and exactly sort of 41 years later, that was what they tried to do with the Remain campaign. Fear. Yes. Fear of all these things. And when you look back now, as I did this week, on some of the things that were said, just what would happen to the country, not after we actually, had negotiated a way out, but the day after the vote almost, they were implying that, the economy would crash, the country would fall to pieces. Yeah, it was very apocalyptic,
it was unbelievable when you think back on it. And I was actually did the BBC David Dimbleby programme that morning, 5 years ago. I was on just as David, in fact, I think I got interrupted in the middle of it. David Cameron came out to resign. And I remember the shock. People that studio, going into that studio at, I think I was there about 7 o'clock in the morning, maybe slightly earlier. And they were shocked. I mean, they were just shocked. And of course, those of us who had been invited, who were supporters of the Leave campaign, we were just so sort of gobsmacked because we had, it was a very surreal atmosphere, and even David Dimbleby just looked completely shocked.
I think people within those circles, they couldn't comprehend.
They'd never talked to anybody else. No, they'd never.
No, I mean, this is something when people say people didn't know what they were voting for when they voted to leave. But when I spoke to those people within those Remain circles, it's quite clear they didn't know anything about the EU. They didn't know how it operated. No. This wasn't something they had cared about before 2016, and suddenly they were painting their faces with the EU flag and this kind of thing, and it became an almost a really zealous commitment to something that they probably weren't that well informed on.
And also that it showed that they couldn't actually find much to be positive. So they couldn't go around talking about how wonderful the EU is and what it's going to do for us. There wasn't much of that. It had to be negative. And of course, they didn't want to talk about what the EU might look like in 5 or 10 years if we did stay in. And that was another really strong reason. People go on about trade and all that, but trade wasn't really why people voted to leave. I mean, most people voted because they really did see the fact that the country was changing, that we had lost a lot of control over our own laws from the European Union, and that it was only going to get worse because there was a real attempt, and we've seen that now since we left, to move towards a closer federal Europe, and that's just not, an island nation. That's not the way we are.
What do you think it says about the left, though, that it became synonymous with Remain, when, of course, after all, the EU is a pro-corporate economic bloc, neoliberal at its heart, built into its constitution, I would say, capitalism, is that it doesn't feel like a socialist project.
No, and that's why, the Labour Party, I don't think could have anyway been portrayed as a left-wing party, really, and maybe they didn't want to be. No, well, he didn't, but I think Jeremy would have liked it to have come back to being a left-wing party, but you couldn't pronounce being a left-wing party and be supporting the EU in the sort of sycophantic way that many of the people within the shadow cabinet did, that it could do no wrong.
That was my problem with it. I couldn't reconcile being on the left and supporting the EU. It seemed incoherent to me.
No, and because there was I think was it the Workers' Party was again. I remember various fringe meetings. We'd have these sort of odd combinations of people being opposed to the EU, and I think was it the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninists, produced the most wonderful leaflets, which actually were just really, really incisive about what was wrong with the EU. And you could have read it and thought, well, hang on, that's actually what the Labour Party should be saying.
Yes, but those ideas weren't articulated very much. Not from the left.
No. We didn't. You have to look on it that we weren't really very coherent. The Leave campaign wasn't desperately coherent in many ways either. We worked we had the Vote Leave campaign, we had the Leave EU campaign, and we had Grassroots Out for a while, and we had, Labour Leave was kind of working between, our little group was working with all these different groups, and it was all very ad hoc. Whereas the Remain campaign did seem much more controlled. I think even the former chairman, Marks and Spencers, has said that, as chairman of the Remain campaign, he didn't have actually any real say. We were much more, I suppose, bottom up in our campaigns, and the left was very fragmented over it. So we didn't really have there wasn't a left-wing, the trade unions. I think that was the big disappointment, apart from the RMT, who unfortunately we had lost the most vocal supporter of Leave with the General Secretary of the RMT dying just a couple of years before that. And so the RMT, although they were opposed to the EU, didn't really have didn't come out and do the rallies, and there was always these arguments about would people appear on platforms with different people, and Nigel Farage became the kind of linchpin of the Leave campaign in one side, and then there were other people who just would, for I think rather really silly reasons, decided they wouldn't appear on the same platform as Nigel.
Yes. So once the vote was counted, once it was in and once the result was clear, then we have this 3-year period where Parliament is ostensibly trying to overturn the result. And I know many people would deny that, but I think that is certainly clear for most people. I think what was quite disturbing was some of the language. So we're going to have a people's vote, this implication that the people didn't vote last time, or stop the coup. It was almost they were using the language of anti-democracy.
Yeah. As if we'd had a sort of anti-democratic coup.
Yes, when it was
over. Yeah,
it was the biggest mandate that we'd ever seen.
But I think we can't dismiss the crucial importance of Theresa May, not in a positive way, but in a negative way. She came in as the new leader and was clearly, having been a Remainer, was not committed to us getting out in the way that we were committed to getting out. And she is responsible for many of the issues that we now face, particularly the protocol, because of her whole determination to really keep us in the customs union and the single market.
And do you feel that it was just she was treating it as damage limitation rather than an opportunity?
I think she was definitely treating it as, look, we've got to get out because the vote has gone that way, but my job is to make sure that we end up with as close a relationship as possible. And so we got that ridiculous situation where instead of discussing trade to start with, we had all these other negotiations on how much money we were going to pay and on EU citizens and so on. So it became, I think she has a huge amount to blame for giving a kind of credibility to those on the opposition side and the Lib Dems, who at her own side, of course, who wanted to make life difficult.
And do you feel vindicated since Brexit, insofar as it does seem to me that a lot of people have turned against the EU now, people who would have voted in favour of it before, particularly over the vaccine rollout, and their willingness to throw Northern Ireland under the bus. These kind of things are seen as, maybe we made the right decision after all.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I know there's been some polls come out that, say we're as divided as ever, but certainly there is not the anger there that there was amongst some elements of the Remain campaign. And I think most people have accepted that was the result. And I also think that maybe, too, they have become more aware of some of the way that the EU has behaved, not just on the vaccinations, although that was a pretty shocking way, and also that, not just in what they did about invoking Article 16 of the protocol, but the fact that they were so far behind because they couldn't actually agree, whereas we had the independence and the ability to go out and order vaccinations. I mean, we're still fighting a battle literally every day. Someone said to me today, we had questions to Lord Frost, and someone said afterwards to me that, there's still people in all the parties, and certainly in the House of Lords, who just want to kind of punish the government because we've left the European Union. And they'll find other ways. I mean, half the people who are going on about Northern Ireland haven't got an interest in the slightest bit in Northern Ireland, but it's a very useful one for them to get up and have a go at the government for, the protocol. And they love to attack our government first before they think of attacking the EU. In fact, they stick up for the EU. I mean, over and over again, you'll find Lords going on about, and the EU has done its best, and why is Her Majesty's government not being more...
People have never been holding the EU to account. Even in the entertainment industry, you don't hear comedians mocking the key figures of the EU when they can be quite ridiculous.
I've never... I don't know what's happened in... I mean, I'm not, I suppose, a great follower of comedians, but I've never understood why so many of them are so kind of anti... they're anti-establishment, which is fine, but then that doesn't lead through to being in any way anti the EU.
Yeah, it's a major... These are establishment figures. A lot of the key figures are centre-right parties in Europe, so you would expect these to be targets. But apparently not. No,
it's always... I mean, I'm afraid I'm blame the BBC for an awful lot. I do, actually. I think the BBC has been shocking throughout the Brexit campaign. And I know the new, whatever his name is, General Secretary or Secretary General or Chief Tim Davie has said things are going to change. But, you can just see it in the every journalist has their own kind of agenda about the EU.
Well, it made me think, after the vote, one of the earliest... interviews with the public that went viral was a man with a swastika tattoo. And you think that's the person that you chose, is it?
Yeah.
I mean, that isn't someone who is representative of Leave voters.
No.
I mean, and maybe that wasn't deliberate, but it seemed... I mean, if I were that journalist, I think, that's some fringe nutter. Let's leave him alone, right? But they went for him and put that on the beat. I mean, that struck me as an odd.
Yes, and that you always get that feeling that they're out to damage as far as possible. I think maybe it's because there is within the BBC just a kind of a group think, which on a lot of other issues as well, and it just seems to be that it's you have to be quite brave, I suppose, to speak out against it, or else you leave and come to GB News.
Good advice. So what was it about this particular issue that created this kind of hysteria and division? And I do say hysteria meaningfully, because after the vote, I lost friends, families were torn apart. It was almost like the Irish Civil War, where brothers were fighting against brothers. It's that sort of odd. And I think a lot of people now, and a lot of Remain voters now, in fact, I spoke to a friend of mine recently who said, I think we did all go mad for a bit. I think people did lose their minds. What is it about this issue that caused that?
I really don't know. It's a very, very good question, but you're absolutely right. People were so angry and personal, unlike any other sort of political issue where you discuss and you can sort of, people would not. I know friends of mine who were told by other friends of theirs, they thought that they really would not be inviting them anymore to have dinner, and it's if that's what happened. You can see that it's going to take a while for that to, for us to come through that. But I just don't know the answer. I mean, have you got an answer?
I wonder if it's just a product of our time. We live in the digital age now. It's a time when social media is polarizing people all the more, and you can exist within this bubble, and you can have this sense in which everyone agrees with you, because of course everyone.
Because it's only your own Twitter followers who are agreeing with you. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people said after the last general election that if you just went on Twitter, it would look like Labour were going to win with a landslide. And this is not representative of the.
No, and you see the danger of and I raised this the other week, because I'm really annoyed now that more and more public institutions are demanding that everybody has to be online and they have to do everything online. And this is not, there's a whole generation who don't want to go online. And then there's a lot of people who don't want to, they still want to be able to speak to somebody and talk to somebody. It's like the idea now, it annoys me, all these machines and, where you go, if you're buying something, you have to go and use the machine rather than a person. Now, I would be dismissed as some kind of, old-fashioned person, but we're losing the personal touch, and we're also, I can't believe that it's not losing jobs as well in some way.
Do you stay offline for the most part?
I'm not on Facebook. I do tweet. I mean, I was very late coming to it, and it took me a while to sort of get into it, and I got very upset at the beginning when you would get sort of, you'd read people being nasty.
Yes.
Now I just go block.
Yeah, that's all you can do.
Block. I love it, and I love
you actually enjoy the blocking.
Yes, I do, because when I've said something and then I look down my timeline, it just gives me, it's really good, because and particularly on anything to do with Northern Ireland, you get all the sort of, Sinn Féin trolls who come on, and I just go block. That's another one gone. Probably, but it doesn't. I'm always amazed that I've got so many followers and think, well, that's quite nice.
So on a broad question, because of your experience, I'm interested in the way in which how free politicians can be with what they say. I mean, you've always said whatever you think, but a lot of politicians don't. And when you're in an interview with a politician, they will dance around the question. You probably saw Richard Madeley literally ending an interview with Gavin Williamson because he just would not answer the question.
I just don't understand it. I don't understand. I mean, obviously, when you're a shadow cabinet minister and there is a government line, you have to try and hold that.
Yes.
But I don't know why people can't be more honest and say, well, actually, I'm not going to answer that because, that's the government line is we're not answering it. At least be honest why you're not doing it.
Because we can see it. I mean, I often feel sorry for a politician who's squirming and not answering the question, because I can tell they're thinking, well, I don't agree with what I've been told to say, but I can't say what I really feel.
Yeah, but there is a lot of careerists in politics.
Right.
And I think there comes a time when, you do have to decide what are you interested in. Because you've become a member of Parliament and you've got into politics, are you doing it? Why are you doing it? If you're only doing it to become, in getting into government and being, getting your car and your red box and all of that, that's not really the motive that is going to mean that you're going to be honest as time goes on. But sometimes it would just, I was. I voted against the Maastricht Treaty, as I said, back under John Smith, because he was quite we had opposed everything going through. And then when it came to the final third reading, the line went out to abstain. And I just thought, we'd spent literally months on the Maastricht Treaty. And I just thought, how ridiculous, all this time, and we'd put all these amendments down and we've opposed something, and now we're going to abstain. So I voted against it. And there were about 30 of us, I think. And I got phoned up that night by John Smith when I got home. I was in Mo Molam's team. I was in a team to do with something called years ago Citizens' Charter, if you can ever remember that. You're probably too young. No, it was Labour's great idea. It was a Citizens' Charter. Anyway, and John Smith just rang me up as soon as I'd got home and said, "Hello, John." And I was genuinely watching an Arsenal football match, and because I'd worked with Arsenal and I'm in their education, and he said, "Oh, you voted against when the line was to abstain," something like that. And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Right, I want you to resign." So I said, "Oh," and literally just at that moment, Arsenal scored, and I sort of went, "Oh." Anyway, I said,
"You had to repress a cheer."
Yeah, that's right. And I said, "Well, if you want me to resign, I think, why don't you sack me?" And I said that just like that. And he said, "Right, you're sacked."
Wow.
And that was it. I mean, it was a junior shadow job. But, and I think from then on, I just felt... Now, then I did become a government minister under Blair in terms of the Home Office and Sports Minister. But then Sports Minister was very much my area. And I in those days... we were much more ciphered, and I didn't sort of feel that I had to get involved too much with any of the other issues. But I think you have to do what you feel right about. There's no point doing something if you don't feel happy.
And wouldn't it be better for the electorate if everyone just said what they thought? Then you would know what you were voting for. And
yes. And sometimes you wonder, is there another way other than party machines? But then, I have thought about it, but I suppose if you're trying to form a government, how do you ensure you get things through legislation? I mean, our legislative system is so bureaucratic too. The length of time to something very, very simple can take a long, long time just because everyone has the opportunity to oppose it and make amendments. It would be nice to be, sometimes I think it would be really nice to be a dictator for a few days.
Wouldn't it?
I mean, I think we all would like that, wouldn't we?
You'd live a life of luxury. You'd have all the best food, and it'd be fantastic.
No, you could just do things like, things that annoy you. Just say, "Fix that."
I mean, it's a very vocational thing to do, to go into politics, and that's why it surprises me when you talk about careerists and they're thinking in terms of opportunity and power and the rest of it. Because I imagine it'd be a horrible existence if you didn't have a genuine passion for the politics that you were espousing.
Yes. I suppose there are lots of things that some MPs would be, they quite enjoy. The House of Commons is a very nice place, working environment, really, normally. Nice, especially if you're into drinking, which I'm not. The bars,
they have a nice bar, do they?
They have very nice bars and nice restaurants and all of that. But no, that's not how people... I think genuinely, probably most people from all political parties go in because they think, that they are going to make a difference. But it's also what worries me, and I've said this so many times, now we are getting, and I've nothing against young people at all, but we're getting people now going straight from usually university to work for an MP and then to become a sort of special advisor, and then they want to become an MP, and you're getting MPs who've never really what I would call worked properly.
Yeah.
When I came in first in 1989, used to sit in the tea room with all these Labour MPs who had been down the mines, who were working in factories, who, were in their 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s even. And it was, they had an understanding of life. And I think an awful lot of our newer, younger people coming in have only seen, life from a relatively privileged way.
Yes, I mean, there's a preponderance of Oxbridge people, for instance, and privately educated people, and you don't get much evidence of that kind of working life.
Well, interesting, the most number of new working class MPs, as I understand it, are some of those Conservative MPs who've come in and won the red wall seats, Labour seats in the North and the Midlands, because they weren't expected to win.
Yes.
So they were kind of well, we just let them,
So that's changed the dynamic.
Yeah. Well, I think it's changed. I said this at the very beginning when they got elected, that, this was going to make the Conservative Party realise, because they were going to have people there who, most of them were born and bred in the area and become, and would be seen in lots of terms, as working class MPs. They just happen to be Conservative. Now, they are, probably going to be, I hope, a check on what the government does to do with, levelling up areas and sticking to promises. Whereas normally in a kind of safe seat, it's, there'll be maybe 100 people after that seat from the Conservatives, and a lot of them, it could go to who they know, who's most around, who's got most friends in high places.
So do you think the Conservative Party is now the party of the working class?
No, I don't think there's really any party that would be completely, the party of the working class. But I do think that they have, I don't think anyone should underestimate the Prime Minister's kind of determination probably to keep those seats and to show that, he has meant what he said about inequality and getting more resources into areas that have been neglected. Now, whether that leads to people in their so-called safe seats feeling neglected, I know that by-election recently, people were saying that, but I don't think so. I think that by-election had specific reasons, maybe, that caused such a big defeat.
So I'm going to draw on your gifts of prophecy, because you predicted the result of the EU referendum, so you could probably do this. What's going to happen to Labour? Can Labour bring those voters back, the industrial heartlands? Can it rebuild the red wall?
No. I don't think Labour is, certainly at the moment, I see no hope whatsoever for Keir Starmer to become the Prime Minister.
Do you think it was the wrong choice?
Well, I'm not even sure that, my personal, although I'm no longer Labour, my personal view at the moment that there are only two people who sort of are around, and neither of them are in Parliament at the moment. One is Caroline Flint, who I think would have made an excellent leader, and the other is actually Andy Burnham, who I've known for a long time and think is very good. But it's not really now about, when Keir is the leader, but even if the leader was changed tomorrow, when you've got people like Gordon Brown coming out talking about hoping that we might, rejoin the European Union.
Yes.
You just wonder, where have these people been? And also, Labour has become seen anyway, and I think in reality is a party that is not interested in the issues that the average person out in the public is interested in. They have become I know it's so cliched to say it, but they are very much now a party of metropolitan sort of very liberal ideas on things, and forgotten, and no patriotism. Patriotism whatsoever, or patriotism. I don't know which one you say.
Either is acceptable.
Either.
But how
either or either.
Exactly. Minefield. How did that happen under Corbyn then? How did the party become even more middle class under a socialist leader?
Well, because we weren't carrying out socialist policies. It was. A lot of it was a sort of almost a pretense, it sounded, they made the right words, but they also thought that some of these minority issues were things that were going to get them, we became a party of almost trying to get a coalition of minorities, and if we can get enough people, using the whole race thing of, if we can get enough immigrants to vote for us, if we can get enough people who, from the LGBT community, it was a kind of issue.
Well, they were doing what Hillary Clinton did, which was target particular demographics and say, we will help you. And of course, not projecting an idea of unity, country as a whole, No,
and it divides people. But Labour set up, Somali groups and Ethiopian groups, and Labour, Friends of India, Friends of this. That doesn't actually bring a cohesive party together, because they've all then got their special interests and they've got their representatives on things representing them, and I think that's a big part. So I don't see the red wall seats falling back, certainly in the next couple of elections.
And from what you're saying, the proposal for a second referendum was really, there's no going back after that point. That seems to have been the thing that's done it.
It certainly did it for me. That was when I knew then that that we had so reneged on our promises that we committed to actually carrying out the referendum. So that's when I decided that I'd had enough.
We don't have much time left. I want to ask you a bit about Northern Ireland, if that's all right. With Edwin Poots now ousted after 21 days, so he's like the Lady Jane Grey of the DUP. What's going on in that party? What's going to happen?
Well, I mean, it is seen as the largest unionist party, but of course an awful lot of pro-union people don't vote necessarily necessarily for the DUP. So I think the idea that somehow because the DUP might be going through a bad time, that's a real worry about the union, I don't accept that. The latest Lifetimes poll is very clear that there has hardly been any movement amongst people who would vote for a united Ireland than 2 years ago. But the protocol has been a hugely damaging on the whole fabric of our stability in Northern Ireland, and then that tied in with some people in the DUP feeling that Arlene Foster had to go, partly because of what happened a couple of years ago or 3 years ago on the big scandal of RHI, the heating incident, which was too complicated to go in. It was a mess, and there were some people
incentivizing people to waste fuel and make money while they were doing it.
Leave your shed open, and and I think there were some people who felt she should have gone then, and then it was handled very badly. Edwin Poots won it, I think, surprisingly, because Jeffrey Donaldson had obviously been around for much longer and was well known. So the crucial issue now is that unless we get rid of the protocol, in my view, the instability will get worse. Societal damage is there.
Yes.
People are feeling angry. It's not just about trade issues at all. I mean, that's important. I mean, when people I know who couldn't get their seeds for their organic farms delivered, all kinds of things going on. You get in touch with Amazon to get something and discover that they don't deliver anymore to Northern Ireland because it's too much hassle. But underneath it all is that the Belfast Agreement was meant to be a balanced agreement that protected the interests of those who wanted to be Irish and protected the interests of those who wanted to be British. So in order to stop a border at the frontier to protect the internal market of the EU, the British government agreed with the push from the Irish government and the EU that it should be in the Irish Sea. So the north-south dimension was protected, pushed by the Irish government, and the east-west was kind of abandoned by our government. So people feel, I did a big rally last Friday night in a place in County Down, and it was very mixed, all backgrounds, middle-class families out at it as well. And yes, they were angry, but the thing that struck me most was just how genuinely upset they were that they could have been, there was a feeling we have been abandoned, betrayed.
Yes.
What have we done ever to deserve this? We didn't threaten violence. Varadkar was the one who threatened violence by taking the custom. Well, he personally didn't threaten violence. Let me say that before I have the trolls on. But he took the picture of the customs post blown up years ago and said, "Oh, look, if you do this." And of course, Theresa May hadn't helped by saying we can't even have a camera at the border for any kind of trade checking.
Yes.
And yet there are cameras there already because the Republic of Ireland's got a different speed limit. There's a different corporation tax, different currency, different. They use kilometres, we use miles. There is a border. It is a frontier. It is an independent country. So if the European Union want to protect their internal market, which I agree they want to, there's so little likelihood of things going over illegally. Then they should do it in their own territory.
Yes, I mean I can't help but notice the glee sometimes with which people are blaming Brexit for any kind
they
of...
love it. They love it.
They do, don't they?
Yeah, and of course in Northern Ireland, the majority of people, not by as big as I thought it might be, voted to remain. But Wales voted to leave, Scotland voted to leave. So that it was a United Kingdom referendum, and it didn't say on the ballot paper, do you want part of the do you wish to leave the European Union, or do you want to leave a little bit left under EU rules and EU courts? So it isn't sustainable. It's going to have to go. And I think our government, is behind the scenes doing a lot to try and influence the EU to be more practical about it. But politically, the EU want to see it as a way of getting us all to come back into the customs, under their rules. So I don't think that will happen. So I think the government is going to have to, at some stage, be quite tough. Otherwise, and this isn't a threat, it's a reality, things are not going to be very nice in Northern Ireland. There will be some real problems because people are genuinely feeling betrayed and feel that the Irish government has more influence and that the British government have gone along with it.
And do you sense that the anger amongst the unionist community is say, comparable to the anger against Margaret Thatcher during the 80s, during the Anglo-Irish agreement?
Well, I think the difference these days is that people are much more aware of things because of the social media and so on. And I think they feel, well, of course, the Anglo-Irish agreement now has gone because of the Belfast Agreement. A lot of the anger at it has been overtaken.
There were effigies burnt of.
Oh yes, I mean it was. It's if you look at the history in a very dispassionate way, there's no doubt about it that Northern Ireland has been incredibly loyal over the years. Thousands died during the war. And the Republic of Ireland was impartial, neutral, and yet time after time, when it comes down to it, the British government will kind of take the Irish government's side. And it's always because of a threat of violence. And so now you're getting a lot of young people in Northern Ireland, young loyalists, young people, beginning to catch on to that because it's been pushed by a lot of people in some situation and saying, well, hang on, violence seems to pay. And that is a real, real worry if people think they get rewarded for threats.
Yes. Absolutely. I mean, with the troubles we had earlier in the year, and straight away people were saying that this is about Brexit, and actually, it's more than that. It was much more. I mean, that was triggered by the funeral arrangements.
Yes, I mean there is the problem is we don't have normal politics in Northern Ireland. There has to be a mandatory coalition between Sinn Féin and the DUP, and you are working a government in Northern Ireland, no matter what anyone says, with one party that doesn't want Northern Ireland to be successful. Why would they? They want a united Ireland. So it's not in their interest to make it. So they make difficulties out of everything. And I think what is so sad is there is a huge Irish diaspora in Great Britain who are very loyal to, obviously, probably to Ireland, but actually have been here for many, many years and don't have that sort of hatred of the British, which Sinn Féin tries to install all the time. And, there is a younger generation now growing up in the Republic of Ireland who have never understood what happened during the worst of the Troubles and the terrible things that went on.
Are you optimistic, though, or do you think that there is the possibility of a return to violence?
All of us are urging that not to happen, and that we have to maintain the moral high ground. But the protocol will have to go one way or the other, and I'm hopeful that everyone will see sense, and that people in this country, in Great Britain, who were leavers, will understand that this is much, much more than about Northern Ireland. This is about actually the EU wanting to punish us still for leaving their little club.
Baroness Hoey, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much.
This has been Free Speech Nation, the podcast for GB News, with me, Andrew Doyle, and Baroness Kate Hoey. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please do like and subscribe, and join us again next week where we'll have another really exciting guest. See you then.